The smell in sublevel 4. The first thing Dr. Adrian Keller noticed that morning was the smell. It clung to the air in sublevel 4 like something rotting in a locked freezer, wet, metallic, and faintly sweet, the kind of sweetness that made your stomach churn. Keller stopped mid-step in the concrete corridor, his ID badge swinging. The lights above hummed with that lazy, flickering glow that never seemed to be fixed. He was alone, at least, he thought so. Security? His voice echoed against the bare walls. "You're supposed to keep this place clean, you know." Static answered him. The wall intercom crackled, then died. Sublevel 4 was home to containment for SCP-106, the Old Man. The Foundation's protocols for this thing were absurdly strict: no corrosion in walls, no loose moisture, no unnecessary staff. And yet, the air felt damp. He pressed on, boots squeaking on the floor, trying not to imagine the stories he'd read in incident reports. About the black sludge, the sudden appearances, the screaming. Halfway down the hallway, he saw it. A smear, dark, irregular, spread across the corner where floor met wall. At first he thought it was an oil leak from the ventilation system. But when he crouched down, he saw the metal beneath had pitted and bubbled, as if acid had been poured onto it. Something dripped from the ceiling. Plop. A thick drop hit his shoulder. He flinched, wiping it with a tissue. The fabric came away black, slick, and strangely warm. His radio clicked to life. "Keller," came the voice of Guard Holt, sharp and urgent. "Get out of sublevel 4. Now." Keller straightened. "Why? What's going on?" "Containment breach." The radio burst into a static screech, then silence. From the far end of the corridor came a slow, deliberate tap, tap, tap. Not footsteps, something heavier. Something wet. And then a voice, impossibly deep and impossibly close. "Doctor." Keller froze. His breath came shallow, chest tightening as the air around him seemed to grow thick. The hallway was long, 30 meters at least, but the voice had been in his ear, as if whispered right beside his skull. The tap, tap, tap came again, echoing off the walls in irregular rhythm. Wet smacks of something heavy being dragged across the floor joined the sound, as though something oozed toward him. He fumbled for his radio. "Control, this is Dr. Keller. Confirm breach." "I have. HSSSSSH." Nothing but static, but this time the static wasn't random, it pulsed, rose and fell in a slow, breathing pattern. "Adrian." He turned, flashlight cutting a pale beam through the flickering overheads. The far corner of the hall was darker than it should have been, like the shadows were thicker there, pooling unnaturally. The smear on the wall was wider now, stretching along the floor toward him, its edges bubbling as if corroding the concrete in real time. Keller stumbled backward. No. No, no, no. The blackness shifted. A pale, rotting hand slid out from the shadow, fingers too long, nails blackened and split. The arm followed, emerging from the darkness like it was pushing through oil. The skin sagged loosely over the bone, and where the elbow bent, a drop of black fluid pattered to the floor with a hiss. SCP-106's head emerged, sunken eyes, skin mottled like rusted metal, mouth drawn into something that might have been a grin but stretched too far, too dry. Its jaw cracked as it moved. "Doctor," it rasped again, the word wet and deliberate. Keller's instincts screamed at him to run, but his legs locked. He heard faint, distant voices, guards shouting, alarms blaring, but they sounded like they were in another building entirely. The hallway around him seemed longer now, stretched impossibly far in both directions. Then 106's hand darted forward, faster than any old, rotting thing should move, and brushed Keller's boot. The floor under him gave way, turning to liquid darkness. He fell. And the screaming started. Keller's scream cut off when the air hit him, thick, stale, tasting of rust and mold. He landed hard on what felt like uneven stone, the impact jarring his spine. His flashlight had somehow stayed in his grip, its beam slicing through an impossible darkness. The ground was wrong. It wasn't concrete. It was pitted, porous, like decayed bone. Small, black rivulets of liquid trickled through the holes, disappearing into unseen depths. "Hello." His voice echoed strangely, as if the walls were both far away and pressed right up against him. The flashlight beam swept across the space, revealing jagged walls that twisted upward into blackness. In some places, they looked wet, in others, they appeared dry and cracked like they'd been scorched centuries ago. Far in the distance, if distance meant anything here, he saw movement. A slumped figure staggered across the uneven terrain, arms jerking in unnatural rhythm. Keller's first thought was another person. He cupped his hands around his mouth. "Hey! Over here." The figure stopped. Slowly, its head rotated, not turned, but rotated, full degrees too far for a human neck. Even at this distance, Keller could see the mouth hang open, lips split and dry. Something black dripped from its chin. It began walking toward him. No, gliding. Its feet didn't touch the ground. Keller's pulse hammered. He stepped back, the beam shaking in his grip. That's when he noticed more shapes in the shadows, slender, hunched, some crawling along the walls. They watched him, silent and still, until the one in front let out a sound like tearing fabric mixed with a long, wet exhale. The walls shifted. He heard stone grind against stone, and the pathway behind him closed like a mouth. The ceiling lowered, no, the ground rose. The space was shrinking. Keller turned and ran, his footsteps echoing in warped rhythm with his heartbeat. Somewhere in the dark behind him, SCP-106's voice followed, steady and patient. "You can't leave." Keller ran. The jagged ground tore at his boots, the holes in the stone gaping like open mouths waiting to swallow him. His flashlight beam jerked wildly, catching glimpses of shifting walls that seemed to rearrange themselves every time he blinked. The air grew hotter, thick with the stink of rot and burning metal. Every breath scraped his throat raw. Behind him, the gliding figure followed without hurry. Keller could hear it, no footsteps, just the subtle rasp of its body brushing against the warped walls. And beneath that, something else. A faint scrape, like nails being dragged along metal. A turn appeared ahead. He didn't remember it being there, but it was his only choice. He darted around it. And almost collided with a wall. The path ended in a sheer drop, a pit yawning below into endless blackness. The figure was closer now, pale face still fixed on him, mouth hanging open as if waiting to taste his fear. Keller swung the flashlight beam across the walls, searching desperately. That's when he saw it, a narrow crack just wide enough for him to squeeze through. The edges shimmered, as if coated with the same corrosive slime he'd seen in sublevel 4. He didn't think. He lunged, forcing himself into the gap. The slime burned through his lab coat instantly, biting into the skin of his arms and sides. He gritted his teeth, stifling a scream. The crack opened into a tunnel that sloped downward at an impossible angle. Gravity felt wrong here, he couldn't tell if he was climbing, falling, or simply being pulled. A voice echoed faintly ahead. "Help, please, someone." Keller's heart leapt. Another survivor. He stumbled toward it, ignoring the ache in his muscles. The tunnel widened, revealing a cavern with a single, flickering light source, a Foundation flashlight lying on the ground. Next to it was a man in a torn MTF uniform, slumped against the wall. His skin was blistered and gray, his eyes glassy. Keller dropped to his knees. "Hey, stay with me. We're gonna get out of here." The man's lips twitched into a smile. "You already belong here." From the darkness above, something began to lower itself toward them, long, skeletal, dripping. Keller stumbled backward, the beam of his flashlight catching the thing lowering itself from above. It wasn't a spider, though it moved like one, limbs bending at angles that made his stomach turn. The skin hung in strips, slick with the same black fluid that hissed when it touched the ground. The MTF man didn't flinch. Didn't even look up. "It's hungry," he whispered, voice thin and almost reverent. "It's always hungry." The thing's head, or what passed for one, twisted toward Keller. It had no eyes, just an expanse of mottled flesh where a face might be, and a mouth that split open vertically, peeling apart like wet paper. The sound it made was worse than the sight, a low, gurgling moan that vibrated in his bones. Keller tried to run, but the ground beneath him changed, softening, sagging under his weight. His feet sank an inch, then two, the porous surface gripping him like quicksand. The MTF man began to laugh quietly. It was a dry, rattling sound, like air passing through broken glass. "There's no out," he said. "Only down." The creature reached for him. Not fast, never fast. The deliberate slowness was worse, each movement dripping with the certainty of inevitability. Its hand passed within inches of his face, the stench of decay overwhelming. Keller screamed and pulled hard, his boots ripping free of the spongy surface. He fell forward, landing on his hands. His flashlight skittered away, its beam swinging wildly before settling on something in the wall. It was a door. Not a foundation blast door, but an old, warped wooden door, the kind you might see in a farmhouse. It looked absurd here, standing alone in the jagged stone. The MTF man's laughter stopped. His head snapped toward the door. "Don't," he said sharply, for the first time sounding afraid. The creature hesitated. It did not approach the door. Keller didn't think, he scrambled to his feet, grabbed the handle, and pulled. The hinges groaned like dying animals, but it swung open, revealing a darkness even deeper than the one around them. Behind him, SCP-106's voice slid into his ear. "You'll wish you stayed." Then Keller stepped through. The door slammed shut behind Keller, the sound echoing like a gunshot. For a moment, there was nothing, no light, no sound, no sense of space at all. Then, gradually, his flashlight flickered back to life. He stood in a hallway. Not a foundation corridor, but an old, narrow passage lined with faded floral wallpaper. The ceiling sagged, water stains blooming across it like bruises. The air smelled of mildew and something faintly sweet, again that nauseating sweetness that had followed him since sublevel 4. A grandfather clock stood at the far end, its pendulum swinging in complete silence. The hands were frozen at 3:07. "Hello?" Keller called, his voice sounding strangely muffled, as though the hallway were swallowing the sound before it could bounce back to him. A floorboard creaked behind him. He spun around, nothing but the same hallway stretching in the opposite direction. Or was it? His stomach dropped as he realized the wallpaper pattern was identical on both ends, right down to the water stain shaped like a crooked smile. He took a cautious step forward. The clock loomed closer. Another step, and he froze. The wallpaper on the left wall now bulged slightly, like something underneath was pressing outward. The bulge moved, slowly, rhythmically, like breathing. Keller inched forward, his flashlight trembling in his grip. As he passed, the bulge slid along the wall to keep pace with him. He broke into a jog, but the thing inside matched his speed exactly. When he finally reached the clock, he grabbed its side to steady himself, and yanked his hand back with a hiss. The wood was warm. The pendulum stopped swinging. From the bulging wall came a faint scratching, followed by a voice so distorted it was almost unrecognizable. "Adrian, help me." He knew that voice. Holt. Guard Holt, the man who had warned him to leave sublevel 4. Keller pressed a hand to the wallpaper. It was damp. His fingertips sank into it like wet fabric. The voice came again, closer this time. It's right behind me. From the other side of the hall, the wallpaper began to split, slowly, deliberately, black fluid leaking through the tear. The tear widened with a slow, wet rip, strands of wallpaper peeling away like skin. The black fluid dripped faster now, splattering on the warped floorboards and hissing as it ate small pits into the wood. Holt. Keller pressed his ear against the damp surface. I'm here, hang on. A hand shot through the opening. It wasn't Holt's. The skin was gray, mottled with rust-colored patches, and the nails were jagged black shards. It groped blindly at first, fingertips grazing the air, then latched onto the frame of the wall with a grip that made the wood groan. The rest of the arm followed, joints bending wrong, elbow reversing before snapping back into place. The blackness inside the tear deepened until it seemed to be swallowing the light from Keller's flashlight. Then the head emerged, SCP-106's leathery face, its lips pulled back in that impossible, dried grin. Its sunken eyes locked onto him. Found you, it rasped. Keller stumbled back, but the hallway betrayed him. Stretching, shifting under his feet so that every step forward carried him no closer to the far end. 106 pulled itself fully into the hallway, moving with that same sickening blend of slow certainty and sudden bursts of speed. The air grew heavier, thick with the metallic stench of decay. Keller turned to run, but slammed into another wall. The hallway behind him had closed off, replaced by damp, rotting plaster. From somewhere deep in the house came the faint, rhythmic tap, tap, tap. The sound seemed to seep into the walls themselves. Adrian, 106 said, taking another step toward him. Come, back, down. The wallpaper began to bubble and split in other places now, each tear leaking more of the corrosive black slime. Shadows shifted behind the walls, dozens of shapes pressing outward, their outlines twitching in unnatural spasms. The nearest tear burst open, and a pale, eyeless face pushed through, mouth opening far too wide. The scream that came from it wasn't human. It was metal shrieking, stone cracking, flesh tearing, all at once. Keller's only escape was the clock. Without thinking, he lunged toward it, yanked the pendulum, and the floor dropped out from under him. Keller landed hard on cold stone, the impact knocking the air from his lungs. His flashlight rolled from his hand, spinning slowly until it came to rest against something, wooden stairs, old and crooked, leading upward into darkness. But above him, there was no ceiling. Just more black. The walls here were stone, slick with condensation. Rusted pipes ran along the ceiling beams, dripping steadily into shallow puddles that dotted the floor. The sound echoed unnaturally, each drop loud as a hammer strike. He retrieved the flashlight, its weak beam sweeping across the space. Shelves lined the walls, cluttered with objects that didn't belong together, Foundation keycards, broken watches, military medals, a child's shoe, a blood-stained scalpel. Every one of them was corroded, pitted with the same slow decay he'd seen in the hall above. At the far end of the room sat a table. And on that table, a photograph. Keller's stomach twisted. It was him. Years younger, standing in front of a two-story brick building. The university where he'd done his first research post. But in the photo, the building's windows were black voids, and a tall, shadowy figure stood just behind his shoulder, one hand almost touching him. He hadn't noticed it before. The pipes above creaked. A low, steady tap, tap, tap began, echoing through the basement. The sound wasn't coming from one place, it was moving, circling the walls. The stairs groaned. Keller aimed his flashlight toward them, but the beam seemed to vanish halfway up. Still, he could hear something descending, slow, deliberate, each step punctuated by a wet, sucking sound. He backed toward the shelves, knocking over a rusted lantern that clanged against the floor. The sound seemed to trigger something. Suddenly, the puddles on the floor began to bubble, releasing foul-smelling steam. From the darkness at the top of the stairs, a voice drifted down. "You've been here before, Adrian." It wasn't 106's rasp. It was his own voice. And then a second one joined it, identical in tone, but whispering from directly behind him. Keller spun, flashlight beam jerking wildly across the damp stone. No one. Just the shelves and their decaying relics. Then movement, something stepping into the edge of the beam. It was him. Same lab coat, same ID badge, same weary face. But the skin was gray, stretched tight over sharp cheekbones, and the eyes were bottomless black. The double tilted its head in a jerky, insect-like twitch. "You left me here," it said, voice identical to his but hollow, as if spoken from inside a metal drum. Another step, and the coat shifted, revealing that the double's chest was caved in, ribs protruding like broken fence posts, each slick with the same black sludge that hissed on the floor. From the shadows between the shelves, another figure emerged. And another. All of them were him, versions with melted features, with their jaws unhinged, with their hands worn down to bone. They moved in silence except for their wet, dragging breaths. Keller backed toward the stairs, but his foot splashed into a puddle that wasn't there before. The black water crawled up his leg like fingers. He kicked free, his heart slamming against his ribs. One of the doubles stepped closer, lifting a hand toward his face. The skin on its palm peeled away in long, curling strips, revealing bone that clicked and scraped against itself. "You know what he wants," it whispered. "You've known since you saw the smear on the wall." Keller's stomach churned. He raised the flashlight like a weapon, its narrow beam slicing across the figures. For an instant, their faces all collapsed inward, as if the light itself was melting them. And then the beam hit the stairs, where something else now stood. SCP-106. It didn't move fast. It didn't need to. The double stepped aside as it descended, its joints creaking, its face split in that dry, terrible grin. Keller's hand tightened on the flashlight. If he was going to die here, he'd at least. The light went out. The darkness wasn't just an absence of light, it was a substance. It pressed against Keller's eyes, seeped into his ears, filled his mouth with the taste of old coins and rotting wood. He froze, listening. The doubles had stopped moving. No breath, no shuffle of feet, just silence so thick it felt alive. Then, a sound. Not footsteps. Not breathing. A faint, wet drip directly above his head. Keller stepped back, bumping into something tall and solid. His hands shot out, wooden shelves. But when he moved to the side, the shelves seemed to twist, their edges flexing beneath his fingers like soft cartilage. Somewhere to his left, a whisper. "Adrian." It was a child's voice now. Young. Fragile. Another drip, this one landing on his cheek. Warm. Thick. The stench hit him instantly, copper, rot, and something acrid that burned his nostrils. He fumbled with the flashlight, smacking it against his palm. Nothing. The switch clicked uselessly under his thumb. A scrape began. Metal on stone, deliberate and steady. The sound circled him, drawing closer in slow arcs. Keller's chest heaved. "Show yourself." His voice sounded too loud, bouncing off walls that suddenly felt much closer. From somewhere in the dark, a deep chuckle rolled out. Not loud, not mocking, just certain. Then a new sound joined it, a low, wet inhalation, like something dragging air through lungs half filled with liquid. It came from directly in front of him. Keller stepped back, and his heel found nothing. The floor was gone. He fell into the black, arms flailing. There was no wind, no sensation of movement, only the growing certainty that he was sinking rather than falling. And in that weightless, choking dark, SCP-106's voice slid around him, everywhere at once. "You were mine before you even saw me." Something cold and solid wrapped around his ankle. Keller kicked wildly, trying to wrench free. Whatever held his ankle was solid, rough-edged, and cold, not the slick rod of 106's touch, but something like stone. It dug into his flesh with deliberate pressure, tightening each time he moved. The sensation of falling stopped. Now he was being reeled in. He reached down, hands fumbling along his leg until his fingers brushed it, a hand. No, not a hand. The shape was wrong, the fingers too long, each joint clicking as it flexed. Its surface was like carved rock, but warm in places, pulsing faintly, as if it had veins. He yanked harder, feeling the skin on his ankle tear under the grip. Warm liquid slid into his boot, his own blood. Something above, or was it below, shifted. A faint glow appeared, barely enough to outline his body in a dim, gray haze. The light revealed shapes all around him, human figures, half embedded in the darkness as though it were solid tar. Their mouths opened in silent screams, arms frozen mid-reach. Some of them still twitched. One of the faces brushed past his own. Its eyes rolled toward him, and its lips moved soundlessly. The grip on his ankle jerked. He was pulled downward through a surface that felt like thick gelatin, the glow above shrinking into a pinpoint. His chest tightened as the darkness closed over his head. Then, impact. He hit solid ground again, knees buckling under the sudden weight of gravity. The floor here was tiled. White at one time, but now mottled with black stains and hairline cracks. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering just enough to make the shadows in the corners seem alive. It was a hallway again. And halfway down it, leaning casually against the wall, was SCP-106. It didn't move toward him. Didn't speak. Just watched. Behind Keller, the sound of dozens of footsteps began, shuffling, dragging, too many to count. The footsteps behind him grew louder, irregular, some heavy, some scraping, some so soft they were almost breaths. Keller didn't turn. He kept his eyes on 106, whose grin never faltered. The old man shifted, leaning slightly forward. Not a lunge, just enough to make Keller's skin crawl. Then it extended one arm and pointed down the hall. Keller followed the gesture. The corridor forked into 3 doorways. Each was different. The first, on the left, was a heavy steel blast door with the Foundation's insignia scratched into its surface. The middle was a set of double doors, their glass panels fogged and smeared from the inside. The rightmost door was a child's bedroom door. Painted white, with stickers of faded stars peeling off. "You choose," 106 rasped. Keller's throat tightened. "What happens if I don't?" From behind him came the sound of something dragging its nails across tile, slow at first, then faster. The footsteps grew chaotic, closer, until warm breath brushed the back of his neck. He moved forward, heart hammering, and stopped at the blast door. The metal was ice cold to the touch, humming faintly, as if something behind it was alive. The middle doors shuddered suddenly, as if struck from the other side. A muffled voice, hoarse, desperate, called his name. "Adrian. Open it." The bedroom door stood perfectly still. But the smell that seeped from its edges was sweet, cloying, almost like rotting fruit. He looked back. The hallway behind him was now filled, crowded with figures pressed shoulder to shoulder, their faces blank or broken, some missing eyes entirely. They stood still, all angled toward him, except for one at the front, which tilted its head with a sickening crack. 106 hadn't moved. But the grin was wider now, the black fluid at the corners of its mouth dripping in steady streams. "You choose," it repeated. Keller's hand tightened on the blast door handle. Keller gripped the cold steel handle, fingers trembling. The muffled voice behind the glass called again. "Adrian, please." It sounded like Holt. He wanted to believe. He wrenched the blast door open with a grinding groan. Inside was not the sterile, secure containment chamber he expected. Instead, he found himself in a room flooded with dim red light. The air was thick with smoke, choking and heavy. The walls oozed with the same black fluid, pulsing like a heartbeat. In the center, chained to a rusted pipe, was Holt. His eyes wide, wild with terror, body shaking violently. "Adrian, get me out," Holt gasped, voice breaking. Keller moved forward but felt the floor shift beneath him, the metal grate cracking and sinking into a pit of shadow. A cold hand grasped his ankle, no, many hands, dragging him down with crushing weight. From the red haze emerged 106's grin, wider and wetter than ever. "Safe," it whispered. "You're still mine." The door slammed shut behind Keller, sealing him and Holt in a living nightmare. Keller struggled against the crushing grip, but the hands pulled him down into darkness. He landed hard beside Holt, the chains rattling as the guard tried to sit up. "Adrian," Holt's voice was weak, panic-stricken. "We have to get out. It's watching." The black fluid pulsed along the walls, thickening like blood. The temperature dropped, breaths turning to mist in the stale air. A voice hissed from the shadows. "Run." Keller looked up. The walls were alive, faces pressed from inside the black ooze, mouths opening in silent screams. From the darkness emerged figures, twisted versions of Foundation personnel, their skin peeled back, eyes hollow, mouths stretched into endless screams. They circled Keller and Holt, moving slowly but relentlessly closer. Keller gripped the chains binding Holt and tore them free with a snap. "Follow me," he hissed, grabbing Holt's arm. Behind them, the red haze thickened, swallowing the corridor beyond the door. The nightmare was far from over. Keller pulled Holt to his feet, legs trembling under the weight of exhaustion and fear. The walls whispered with voices, some pleading, some laughing, all twisted and broken. "Which way?" Holt gasped, eyes darting frantically. Keller scanned the room. The red haze obscured everything beyond a few feet, but he saw two doorways, one barred with heavy chains, the other cracked open, revealing pitch-black emptiness beyond. "Door," Keller said, nodding toward the open one. They hurried through, the temperature plunging suddenly. The black emptiness swallowed them whole, suffocating, thick as molasses. Keller's flashlight flickered on again, cutting weakly through the void. Holt stumbled, gasping for breath. "We're not alone," Keller whispered. Shapes emerged from the darkness, figures moving just beyond the flashlight's reach, limbs twisted, faces gone. A whisper slithered through the void, "You cannot leave." Keller tightened his grip on Holt's arm. "Run or be consumed." The nightmare pressed in on all sides. The beam of Keller's flashlight cut a shaky path forward. The black emptiness solidified into walls, but they weren't stone or metal, more like the inside of a massive lung. Each step sank slightly into a soft, yielding surface that exhaled warm, damp air in slow rhythm. The walls bulged inward, then out, accompanied by a low, wet shh that made the hair on Keller's arms stand up. Holt gagged. "God, what is this place?" Before Keller could answer, the passage shuddered, a ripple running the length of it like something enormous had shifted in its sleep. The floor swelled beneath their feet, lifting them several inches before settling back down. The flashlight flickered, revealing slick, veiny patterns crawling along the walls, pulsating in time with the breaths. Keller swore he saw the faint outline of ribs arching above them, disappearing into the haze. A new sound joined the breathing, a slow, rhythmic tap, tap, tap from somewhere ahead. Holt froze. "It's him." The corridor narrowed suddenly, the walls pressing closer, moist heat pressing against their bodies. Keller pushed forward, forcing himself and Holt through the tightening gap. His shoulder brushed the wall, and it twitched, releasing a hot burst of foul-smelling air. They emerged into a wider section. The flashlight beam fell on something glistening in the center of the floor, a ragged hole, its edges raw and pulsing, black slime dripping steadily into its depths. From inside the hole came a faint laugh, dry, cracking, patient. Then the floor behind them convulsed, bulging upward as something began forcing its way through. The black hole pulsed like a heartbeat, the slime oozing thicker now, bubbling as if boiling from within. Keller's breath caught in his throat, every instinct screaming to run, but his legs refused to obey. From the depths came a sound, not the rasp or shriek Keller knew, but a low, guttural rumble, something ancient and hungry. The hole widened, stretching the edges of the floor until it looked more like a living wound than an opening. A shape began to rise, slowly, impossibly, its form blurred at first like smoke caught in a draft. Then details sharpened, a mass of writhing tendrils, covered in patches of mottled skin, slick and scarred, dripping with that black corrosive fluid. Eyes blinked open, hundreds of them, each glowing faintly red, scattered chaotically across the mass. It was not human. Not even close. Holt stumbled backward, horror frozen on his face. "It's," he whispered. "Worse than, the old man." Keller clenched his fists. This was no longer just SCP-106. It was something born from the same nightmare, but far more primal, an abyssal parasite that fed on fear and decay. The creature extended a tendril, slick and barbed, reaching toward them with deliberate slowness. Keller raised his flashlight like a weapon, the beam trembling as it landed on the writhing mass. The eyes turned toward him, hundreds of tiny pupils focusing, waiting. Then the creature opened its terrible maw, a circular mouth lined with rows of serrated teeth, dripping corrosive saliva. Before Keller could react, the tendril lashed forward. The door shuddered with every impact, steel groaning under the assault of the creature's tendrils. Keller pressed his weight against it, sweat stinging his eyes, every muscle screaming in exhaustion. Behind them, Holt's breathing came in short, ragged gasps. The broken pipe slipped from his hands and clattered to the floor. "Adrian," Holt whispered, voice trembling. "I don't know how much longer I can hold." Before Keller could respond, the door cracked, a thin line of dark liquid seeping through the gap. The smell hit them both, sour and rotten, making Keller gag. The creature's guttural roar shook the air. Then came the unmistakable sound of SCP-106's rasping laughter, echoing from the shadows. Keller felt something cold brush his ankle. He glanced down, black tendrils creeping through the crack beneath the door, winding and twisting like serpents. He slammed his foot down, trying to crush them. They writhed and pulled back, only to surge forward again, faster this time. Holt scrambled up, eyes wild. "We have to get out. Now." Keller's fingers found the door's emergency release panel. With shaking hands, he yanked it open. The door slid upward with a grinding screech, just enough space for them to slip through. They dove through the gap, tumbling into darkness on the other side. Behind them, the door slammed shut with finality. The rasping laughter faded, but the nightmare wasn't over. Keller lay on the cold floor, chest heaving, eyes wide with fear. "We're not safe," he whispered. "Not yet." Keller forced himself to his feet, helping Holt up beside him. The air was thick with a damp chill, the scent of decay clinging to every breath. They found themselves in a cavernous space, walls slick with black slime, illuminated by faint phosphorescent fungi clinging to cracks in the stone. "Where are we now?" Holt's voice was a harsh whisper, eyes darting nervously. Keller scanned the shadows. Still inside, something inside 106's pocket dimension. The ground beneath them trembled slightly, a low hum vibrating through the air. From the darkness ahead, a flicker of movement, shapes emerging, twisted and malformed, half crawling from the slime-coated walls. Keller grabbed Holt's arm, pulling him back. "Stay close." The shapes coalesced into indistinct forms, creatures of nightmare, their limbs bent at impossible angles, eyes glowing faintly red in the gloom. A guttural growl rumbled from the largest figure. Keller raised his flashlight, illuminating the mass of writhing tendrils and scarred flesh. "Run," Holt whispered. They sprinted forward, slime squelching beneath their boots, the twisted creatures pursuing with terrible speed. Behind them, the rasping laughter returned, farther away now, but closing fast. The abyss had swallowed them whole. The tunnel twisted and turned like a grotesque serpent, the walls pulsating as if alive. Keller could feel the faint heartbeat beneath the surface, slow, steady, and unforgiving. Holt stumbled, nearly falling into a slick pool of black fluid that bubbled ominously. "This place, it's a prison." Keller nodded grimly. "A living one." They pressed on, the air thick with the metallic scent of blood and decay. The walls sometimes bulged inward, trapping them in narrow corridors barely wide enough to squeeze through. Every few steps, faint whispers echoed, snatches of voices from distant memories, pleading for release. Keller recognized some. Voices from the Foundation, lost researchers, forgotten victims. Ahead, the passage opened into a vast chamber, its ceiling lost in darkness. Enormous tendrils writhed along the walls, occasionally striking the floor with wet slaps. In the center, a grotesque altar of bone and flesh, smeared with dark ichor. Keller's breath caught. "We have to get through." Holt swallowed hard. But what if it's a trap? Before Keller could answer, a tendril lashed out, narrowly missing them. The labyrinth was watching, waiting, and hungry. The air grew thicker, oppressive, like wading through viscous tar. Keller's lungs burned with each breath, but he pushed onward, dragging Holt behind him. Ahead, the chamber opened into a vast, dimly lit cavern. The walls here throbbed with sickly veins, glowing faintly red beneath the slick black surface. In the center of the cavern lay a grotesque throne, a massive chair crafted from twisted bone and metal, covered in patches of decayed flesh. And upon it sat a figure. Not the old man exactly, but something more. A hulking mass of flesh and shadow, its many eyes closed as if in slumber. Keller's heart pounded. This was the source, the heart of the maze itself. Suddenly, the creature's eyes snapped open, hundreds of glowing red orbs focusing on them simultaneously. A guttural growl reverberated through the cavern. "Run!" Holt yelled, but Keller stood frozen, eyes locked with the abomination. The air rippled as the figure stirred, tendrils reaching out like grasping fingers. The nightmare had reached its core. The cavern shook violently as the figure on the throne rose, each movement wet and deliberate. Chunks of decayed flesh sloughed off its frame, splattering to the floor with sickening thuds. Keller felt the air grow colder, his breath misting. Holt grabbed his arm, yanking him back toward the tunnel they'd come from, but the passage was gone. The wall had sealed over, slick and pulsating. "Trapped," Keller muttered, his voice tight. The creature's tendrils extended, slithering across the floor, leaving behind trails of steaming black slime. One tendril coiled around the altar in the center of the room, snapping it apart effortlessly. A deep, rasping voice filled the air, low and distorted, but clear. "You walk, in my domain." Holt's hands shook. "It's him. 106, but bigger." Keller stepped in front of him, holding his knife, though it felt laughably small. "We don't want to stay." A wet chuckle echoed from the creature. "You all stay." The tendrils lunged. Keller slashed at one, slicing into the rubbery flesh, black fluid spraying across his face. The smell was overwhelming, like burning rot. Holt screamed as another tendril wrapped around his waist, lifting him into the air. Keller charged forward, stabbing again and again, desperate to free him. The creature roared, not in pain, but in amusement. The roar rattled the chamber, sending shockwaves through the slick floor. Cracks spiderwebbed outward, glowing with an eerie crimson light. Keller managed to hack through the tendril holding Holt, the severed piece writhing on the ground before dissolving into sludge. Holt dropped to his knees, coughing and spitting as the black slime burned his skin. "Keller, something's happening," Holt wheezed, pointing to the walls. The veins along the cavern's surface began to bulge and burst, spraying streams of steaming liquid. The throne behind the creature melted into the floor, merging with the pulsating flesh beneath it. The entity itself twisted unnaturally, its shape elongating, splintering, parts of it stretching into the cracks. The voice returned, now fractured and echoing from every surface. Leaving is not allowed. The floor gave way beneath Keller's feet, and he barely managed to grab Holt before they fell into the churning black void below. The heat was unbearable, like standing over an open furnace. Chunks of bone and debris began falling from above, vanishing into the abyss. The cavern's ceiling sagged, tendrils dropping down like nooses. Holt looked at Keller, eyes wide. If this place collapses, we're done for. Keller gritted his teeth. Then we don't let it collapse with us inside. Somewhere in the chaos, Keller saw it, a faint flicker of white light, small but steady, far across the shifting floor. Their only way out. Keller hauled Holt to his feet, the heat from the black void licking at their ankles. Every step sent vibrations through the unstable floor, slick with viscous sludge. Behind them, the entity's fractured voice echoed like a death knell. You will not leave. The cavern cracked wide, giant chunks of flesh and stone toppling into the abyss. Tendrils whipped and lashed, forcing them onward. Faster. Keller barked, pulling Holt forward. Holt stumbled, breath ragged, but didn't stop. The light flickered ahead, promising salvation. Suddenly, a massive tendril smashed the ground beside them, sending debris flying. Keller shielded Holt, heart pounding. This way! Keller shouted, veering toward a narrow passage half covered in oozing black slime. They slipped inside just as another chunk of floor collapsed behind them, swallowed by the endless darkness below. The passage twisted and spiraled downward, but the light grew stronger. Hope burned bright, if only they could hold on. The narrow tunnel opened into a small chamber, the walls slick but less hostile, and a soft white glow emanated from a crystalline orb resting on a pedestal. Keller approached cautiously, heart pounding. The orb pulsed gently, casting calm light across the slime-streaked walls. Holt leaned against the far wall, catching his breath. Is that a way out? Keller said, voice barely above a whisper. But as Keller reached for the orb, the ground trembled violently. Cracks split the chamber's floor, black ichor bubbling up. From the shadows, the creature's fractured voice whispered, "You cannot leave." Tendrils erupted from the cracks, but the light from the orb flared suddenly, blinding and pure. The tendrils recoiled, sizzling where the light touched. Keller seized the moment, grabbing Holt's hand. Now! They dashed toward the orb, feeling its warmth push back the darkness. As their hands closed around it, a surge of energy lifted them. And everything went white. Keller's eyes snapped open, sharp pain stabbing through his temples. The sterile white light of the Foundation infirmary was blinding, drowning out the shadows of the nightmare he'd just escaped. Holt lay in the bed beside him, pale and trembling, hooked to monitors that beeped steadily. Adrian, Holt's voice was hoarse, fragile. We made it. Keller tried to speak but found his throat raw, dry. Memories of the abyss, the pulsing walls, the tendrils, the monstrous figure, flooded back in suffocating waves. Dr. Mendez appeared, face grave but relieved. You're lucky to be alive. We feared the worst after the containment breach. Keller's gaze flicked to his hands. Black stains marred his skin, residue that refused to wash away. The pocket dimension, it left something behind, Keller whispered. Holt nodded slowly. I feel it too. Like a shadow, inside me. The doctor's eyes narrowed. You may have been exposed to a fragment of SCP-106's essence. We'll need to monitor you closely. Keller clenched his fists. The nightmare might be over for now, but its mark was permanent. And deep down, he knew it wasn't finished with them yet. Days passed in a blur of tests and silent watches. Keller lay in the sterile cell-like room, the black stains on his skin slowly fading but never quite gone. Every time he closed his eyes, the twisted labyrinth of flesh and shadow returned, the endless corridors, the suffocating slime, the hundreds of glowing eyes. Holt's condition was worse. The shadow inside him moved beneath his skin, subtle at first, a twitch in his fingers, a flicker behind his eyes. But it grew, gnawing at his sanity. One night, Keller heard faint whispers through the wall, a voice only he could hear, low and rasping, promising release, vengeance, and power beyond human comprehension. He clenched his jaw. "Not yet," he muttered. "Not yet." The Foundation kept a close watch, but Keller knew their real battle was just beginning. SCP-106's poison had seeped into their minds and bodies. Escape was only the first step. And somewhere, in the shadows beyond reality, the old man waited. Weeks later, Keller sat alone in the observation room, the flickering monitors displaying data streams and security feeds from the containment wing. Every camera pointed at SCP-106's cell flickered intermittently, a telltale sign of the entity's restless presence. Holt remained confined to medical isolation, his condition deteriorating, the shadow moving beneath his skin becoming more tangible, almost visible in the flickering lights. Suddenly, an alarm blared. A chilling voice echoed through the speakers, rasping, distorted. "You cannot run. You cannot hide." The lights in the wing dimmed, plunging the hallway into darkness. Cameras went offline one by one. Keller's heart hammered. He grabbed his radio. "Security to all units. Containment breach imminent, prepare for immediate lockdown." But deep down, he knew the old man was coming back. And this time, there would be no running. The air grew thick with the scent of rust and decay as Keller stepped into the containment wing, flashlight shaking in his grip. The walls seemed to bleed darkness, shadows crawling like living things. "Adrian, you're here," a voice rasped from the shadows, the old man's voice, wet and hungry. Keller swallowed hard, gripping his knife tighter. "This ends now." From the depths of the cell emerged a twisted figure, SCP-106, but changed. Its skin cracked and peeled, revealing glowing red veins beneath. Its smile was wider, more malicious. The ground trembled as tendrils of black slime spilled forth, reaching for Keller like hungry fingers. He charged, knife gleaming in the dim light, slashing at the nearest tendril. It hissed, retreating briefly. Behind him, Holt staggered in, eyes wild but determined. "You're not alone." Together, they fought, blades against darkness, hope against despair. But the old man laughed, a sound that promised the nightmare was far from over. The battle was a blur of motion, screams, and the tearing sound of steel meeting flesh, not human flesh, but something far older and more resilient. Keller's arm throbbed with pain where a tendril had grazed him, the skin beneath already darkening. Holt, panting and slick with sweat, drove his blade into the old man's side. For a moment, the creature's form wavered, its smile faltering. Then it dissolved, collapsing into a puddle of black sludge that sank into the floor, vanishing entirely. Silence. The containment wing's emergency lights flickered back on. Doors sealed, alarms quieted. But the air was still thick with the taste of rot. Keller and Holt exchanged a look, no words, just the unspoken knowledge that this was not victory. Later, back in medical isolation, Holt spoke first. "We didn't kill it." Keller stared at the wall, voice low. "No. We just made it let go, for now." Somewhere in the deepest shadows, beyond the reach of the Foundation's lights, SCP-106 was waiting. Watching. Learning. And next time, it wouldn't be content to play. In a sterile briefing room deep within Site-19, high-ranking officials gathered around a glowing holographic map. Keller and Holt were conspicuously absent, whispers circulated about their status, but official reports claimed the breach was contained with minimal casualties. Dr. Mendez stood at the head of the table, her expression unreadable. "The incident has been classified as a Level 4 containment breach. Public disclosure is prohibited. A senior officer nodded. Agreed. All personnel involved will be reassigned or placed under indefinite medical observation. Behind closed doors, Keller and Holt's physical and psychological states were examined relentlessly. The black residue on their skin defied analysis, sometimes fading, sometimes returning, seemingly tied to their mental state. Attempts to decontaminate the residual SCP-106 influence failed. Some speculated the entity had left a fragment of itself inside them, an infection that might one day resurface. Mendez's voice was low, almost a whisper. "We've contained the breach, yes. But at what cost? And how long before the old man comes calling again?" The room fell silent, the weight of their secret pressing down on them all. Keller sat alone in the dimly lit observation chamber, the black stains faintly visible on his hands. Every night, the whispering began, soft, insidious, creeping through his thoughts like smoke. He clenched his fists, willing the voices away. But they promised things: power, freedom, release from the endless nightmare of his own mind. Holt was worse. His eyes had taken on a hollow, haunted look, and his sleep was shattered by nightmares of writhing flesh and endless darkness. One evening, Keller found Holt staring blankly at a cracked mirror, whispering, "The old man waits. He's inside me now." Keller didn't respond. He knew the truth: the old man's shadow had rooted itself deep, a cancer beneath the skin and soul. The Foundation's containment was a lie. The nightmare lived on, in their minds, their bodies, their very souls. And somewhere, beyond the veil, SCP-106 watched, patient and eternal. Weeks later, deep within the recesses of Site-19's medical wing, Keller lay restless on his cot. The residual black stains on his skin had faded, but the darkness in his mind pulsed stronger than ever. A faint whisper echoed inside his skull, soft, almost comforting, yet undeniably sinister. "The old man's seed has been planted," Keller muttered under his breath. Unknown to the Foundation, a small fragment of SCP-106's essence had transferred, not just into Keller and Holt, but into an experimental containment drone stored nearby. In the drone's cold, mechanical core, a spark ignited, an ancient, malignant intelligence waiting to grow. The final seed had been sown. And soon, the nightmare would begin anew. The hum of machinery filled the isolated chamber as the experimental drone activated, its sensors flickering erratically. Monitors showed erratic data, alarms briefly chimed, but the system quickly stabilized, too quickly. Unseen by the technicians monitoring from behind reinforced glass, a thin tendril of black ichor seeped from a tiny crack in the drone's casing, sliding along the floor like a living shadow. Deep within, a voice whispered, old and hungry. "The seed grows." Across the facility, Keller felt a sudden jolt, a mental ripple that sent shivers down his spine. Holt twitched in his sleep, eyes rolling back momentarily. The old man was waking. The nightmare had only just begun. 2 days after the drone's malfunction, strange reports began trickling in. Technicians complained of headaches, vertigo, and the sensation of being watched. Security logs showed fleeting shadows darting across corridors. Always too fast for the human eye to fully register, yet persistent enough to unsettle. In Lab 4B, Dr. Levitt collapsed mid-experiment. Medical scans showed black, vein-like patterned spiderwebbing beneath his skin, pulsating faintly. The symptoms matched neither any known disease nor SCP contamination protocols. Keller watched from behind the glass, the image gnawing at him. He didn't need a diagnosis, he knew. The seed had begun spreading. The Foundation responded with Contagion Protocol Omega, lockdown, full isolation, and total communication blackout from the outside world. But in the shadows, the old man's influence threaded itself deeper into walls, wires, and minds. And no wall, no lock, no clearance level could keep him out for long. Holt's condition worsened rapidly. The once clear eyes dulled to a milky haze, and his movements grew jerky, unnatural. Keller sat by his bedside, gripping his friend's cold hand. "Stay with me, Holt. Fight it." But Holt's voice, when it came, was a rasped whisper layered with something else, a deep, guttural undertone. "It's inside me, consuming, changing." That night, alarms blared through the medical wing. Keller rushed to the corridor, only to find the door to Holt's room fused shut with blackened flesh-like material. Security teams arrived, but the camera feeds inside showed only shifting shadows and muffled growls. Minutes later, the door burst open. Holt stood there, no longer fully human. His skin hung in patches, revealing veins coursing with dark, glowing ichor. His eyes locked onto Keller's. "The old man has returned. And I am his herald." Keller backed away, horror and resolve battling within him. This was no longer containment, it was a war. Chaos erupted as alarms blared throughout Site-19. The corridors flooded with emergency lighting, shadows twisting and dancing just beyond the edges of vision. Keller raced down the hall, heart pounding. The once sterile facility had become a labyrinth of terror, corridors warped and slick with the spreading black ichor. Security teams struggled to contain the infected personnel, creatures writhing in pain and fury, their bodies grotesquely altered by SCP-106's influence. Holt, now a monstrous shadow of his former self, led the horde, his guttural commands echoing off the walls. Keller ducked behind a pillar, catching his breath. "This has to end," he muttered. "Before it's too late." He reached for his radio, voice steady despite the chaos. "All units, fall back to the main control room. Initiate lockdown protocols. We need to contain this before it spreads beyond the site." The fight for Site-19 had begun. The control room was a fortress under siege, doors barred, windows cracked from impacts, and flickering monitors casting eerie glows over the weary defenders. Keller took position near the entrance, weapon ready, muscles taut with exhaustion. The air reeked of burnt circuits and something far worse, decay and malevolence. Holt, now a twisted mockery of humanity, battered the reinforced door, his guttural voice chanting words that echoed like a curse. "Hold them!" Keller shouted, firing into the darkness beyond. Shots echoed, some striking targets, others swallowed by the creeping shadows. Backup teams streamed in, battered but determined. Yet with every passing moment, the dark tide pushed closer. Keller glanced at the console. The only hope lay in reactivating the dimensional seals, the fragile barrier between reality and the old man's domain. Sweat dripped down his face. "I'm going in," he said. "If this ends here, so be it." With grim resolve, Keller plunged deeper into the darkness, the final stand against SCP-106's wrath beginning now. Keller's boots echoed down the dim maintenance tunnel, a narrow corridor lined with exposed pipes and blinking emergency lights. The distant sounds of battle faded behind him, replaced by a heavy silence that pressed on his chest. Ahead, the dimensional seal chamber awaited, a stark room with a massive, humming apparatus that pulsed with energy. The console glowed, awaiting activation, but Keller's fingers trembled as he reached out. Suddenly, a chilling presence filled the air, a slow, rasping breath from the shadows. "You cannot stop what is already begun," whispered the old man's voice, dripping with malice. Keller spun, knife raised. Shadows shifted and coalesced into a twisted form, half flesh, half shadow, eye sockets glowing crimson. The creature lunged, claws scraping sparks from the metal floor. Keller dodged, heart pounding, slashing his blade into the creature's arm. "Now or never," he muttered, sprinting to the console. His fingers danced over the controls, initiating the seal's power-up sequence. The chamber hummed louder, the air crackling with energy. The creature screamed, the sound a horrific blend of rage and pain, before dissolving into black mist. A blinding light filled the room, and Keller shielded his eyes. When he looked up, the seal held steady, the darkness receding. Breathless, he collapsed, knowing the battle was won, for now. Weeks after the seal's activation, Site-19 began to rebuild. The walls were scrubbed clean, floors polished, and life returned to the facility's corridors, at least on the surface. Keller walked alone through the quiet halls, his black-stained hands tucked into his coat pockets. The memories of the old man's domain haunted him, the endless decay, the whispering darkness, the feeling that something waited just beyond the light. He paused at a cracked mirror in a deserted hallway, catching his reflection. For a moment, his eyes flickered, glowing faintly red before returning to normal. A low whisper echoed in his mind, almost inaudible. "I am waiting." Keller clenched his fists. The Foundation had won the battle, but the war was far from over. In the shadows, SCP-106's seed still grew. And one day, the nightmare would return. Months had passed since the containment breach, but the facility felt colder, more hollow. Keller's days were filled with routine checks and endless decontamination procedures, but nights brought no peace. In the deepest levels of Site-19, a forgotten storage locker sat locked and untouched. Inside, the experimental drone, sealed away after its mysterious malfunction, rested in silence. Yet inside the drone's core, the ancient darkness pulsed. It had grown, feeding on the residual energy from SCP-106, waiting patiently for the moment to emerge. One night, the drone's sensors flickered to life. A single tendril of black ichor oozed through a crack, reaching out like a waking serpent. Far above, Keller shivered, feeling a cold ripple down his spine as the whisper returned, a soft, terrible promise. Soon. The drone's black tendrils slithered silently through maintenance tunnels, slipping past security cameras and locked doors with unnatural ease. Its movement was deliberate, intelligent, an echo of the old man's malice reborn in synthetic form. Deep inside Site-19's power grid, the tendrils latched onto cables, corrupting data streams and plunging sectors into darkness. Alarms buzzed faintly but quickly died as systems flickered back online, seemingly unharmed. Meanwhile, Keller sat in his quarters, senses on edge. A sudden jolt of unease twisted his gut, the same whisper that haunted his dreams now echoed through the facility's very walls. "It's waking." Across the site, technicians began reporting shadows that moved against the light, fleeting but undeniable. Keller's eyes narrowed. The nightmare was not done, it had simply changed shape. The power flickered again, plunging the lower levels into near darkness. Keller moved cautiously through the labyrinthine corridors, the echo of his footsteps swallowed by an unnatural silence. Surveillance feeds showed static, then flickered to reveal shadowy figures, barely visible, creeping just beyond the camera's reach. In the central control room, Dr. Mendez frowned at the data. "There's interference, but no logical source. It's as if the shadows themselves are alive." Keller gritted his teeth. "This isn't a malfunction. The old man's seed is spreading." Suddenly, monitors flickered violently, showing brief glimpses of writhing darkness before returning to normal. A chilling voice whispered over the intercom, distorted but unmistakable. "You cannot hide from me." The containment protocols were failing. And the nightmare was awakening in full force. Keller stood before the heavy blast doors leading to the facility's oldest, most forgotten sublevels. The corridors beyond had long been sealed, whispered about as a place where the Foundation's darkest experiments had been buried, and sometimes forgotten. But now, it called to them. "Ready your gear," Keller ordered. "We're going down." The team moved cautiously, flashlights piercing the thick darkness. The air was heavy, stale with decay. The walls seemed to pulse faintly, as if breathing with a life of their own. Voices, half whispers, half screams, echoed through the halls, disorienting and maddening. As they advanced, black tendrils slithered from cracks in the floor and walls, curling around their boots and wrists. "Containment is collapsing," whispered Dr. Levitt, voice trembling. "We're not just fighting SCP-106 anymore. We're fighting the darkness itself." Keller tightened his grip on his weapon. The descent into the abyss had begun, and there might be no coming back. The deeper they went, the heavier the air grew, thick with a smell like burnt iron and decayed flesh. Their lights revealed twisted, broken machinery fused with blackened organic matter, as if the very foundation of the site was being consumed from within. Suddenly, the corridor ahead warped and buckled, a living distortion shimmering like heat haze. Keller signaled for the team to halt. From the flickering shadows, a guttural voice emerged, Holt's voice, yet twisted and broken. "You cannot fight what's already inside. Join me." A shadowy figure materialized, half man, half darkness, eyes burning crimson. It lunged. The team opened fire, but bullets passed through like smoke. The creature vanished into the walls, its chilling laughter echoing. Keller's mind raced. The darkness wasn't just spreading, it was becoming part of the site itself, a living nightmare feeding on their fear. "We need to find the core," Keller said grimly. "And end this." The tunnel opened into a vast chamber, bathed in an eerie, sickly green glow. At its center pulsed a grotesque mass, a writhing fusion of metal and blackened flesh, veins throbbing with unholy energy. The core. The seed had grown into a monstrous heart, feeding on the facility itself, spreading its corruption. Keller's breath caught as tendrils of ichor stretched toward them, the air thick with whispers of despair. "This is it," he said, voice steady but heavy. "Destroy it, or we all become part of this nightmare." The team spread out, weapons drawn, faces grim. Every second counted. As explosives were set and firing lines held, Keller felt the old man's presence closing in, a cold, ancient hatred promising oblivion. The countdown began. The timer blinked down, 10. 9. Keller gritted his teeth, heart pounding. Around him, the team braced for impact, weapons trained on the writhing core. "Now!" Keller shouted. The explosives detonated in a thunderous blast. The chamber shook violently, debris and black ichor exploded outward like a storm of living shadows. For a moment, the corruption seemed to scream in rage, tendrils thrashing wildly before beginning to wither and dissolve. The oppressive air lightened, and faint natural light pierced the gloom. But Keller knew better than to feel relief. The old man's essence was ancient and insidious, it never truly died. As the dust settled, Keller crawled from the rubble, wounded but alive. The seed had been crushed, for now. But the shadows were only retreating, gathering strength for their inevitable return. The corridors of Site-19 were eerily silent in the days following the explosion. The black ichor had receded, leaving behind scorched walls and a lingering sense of unease. Medical teams tended to the wounded, while engineers worked tirelessly to repair the damaged infrastructure. Keller sat in the infirmary, his body battered but his mind restless. He traced the faint scars on his hands, the remnants of SCP-106's touch. Dr. Mendez entered quietly, eyes heavy with worry. "You did what you had to, Keller. The seed is gone, but the darkness will always be there, waiting." He nodded grimly. "We've bought time. But the war isn't over." Outside the facility, the wind whispered through the barren landscape, carrying secrets and shadows. Somewhere, deep beneath the earth, a small pulse of black light flickered, waiting. The nightmare was far from finished. Days turned into weeks, but Keller's nights were plagued by dreams. Whispering voices curled around his thoughts, soft and venomous. In the dark corners of his mind, the old man's shadow stirred, waiting, patient. One evening, while reviewing containment logs, Keller noticed a pattern: unexplained blackouts, shadow movements, and odd readings clustered around a forgotten wing of Site-19. He gathered a small team and descended once more into the depths, flashlights slicing through the darkness. The walls seemed to breathe, and faint echoes of a distant laughter chilled their blood. Keller paused, whispering to himself, "This isn't over. It never will be." The shadows watched, waiting for the moment to rise again.